Oh, all right. So, again, welcome to this extension session of Building Inclusive Teams, our Summer Institute from this last summer. My name is Ashley Quick, and this is actually my fourth year with Public Consulting Group, going on my fourth year now with Public Consulting Group and Project Success. Before I joined the team, I was a special education teacher for about 10 years. I took what I call a gap year or 2 or 3 in between, and now I've been working with Project Success right around 3.5 years. And if you're familiar with any of our trainings previously, you know we like to show off and kind of brag on our families. So this is my family from early on in the quarantine process. My husband, Tony, and our twins, Aaliyah and Jackson, who may be making special guest appearances today if we're lucky. You never know, working from home.
Good afternoon. My name is Heidi Brett Baker, and I've been with Project Success um, going on my third year. I've been an educator for a long time, and so I've had the pleasure of being a classroom teacher. And then I moved on to do some administrative work and did several different roles in that realm. And then I went on to higher ed and taught at the university level for a while. And then I joined PCG a couple of years ago and work on the team. And in my pictures, my husband and I have 8 children, so I couldn't fit all those kiddos in the pictures, but I do have my grandchildren here. So here are my 5 grandchildren. We have 5 boys and one little granddaughter. So we love to show off our children, our grandchildren, and show you why we do what we do every day.
And if we were in person, the way we wish we were, we would offer to have you all share pictures of your loved ones, children, grandchildren, pets, whoever. But unfortunately, we're not together today. So just know that in the future, we hope that we can share that with you as well. Thanks, Heidi. Heidi will be facilitating the panel here in just a little bit, so you'll hear from her again shortly. The rest of our team is also joining us on this webinar this afternoon. We have our director, Meredith Keaty-Merck, and then the remaining team members, Amy Howie. She's been with Project Success really since almost from the beginning. And then we have our project manager, Mary Baker-Budisa, and project specialist, Christine Krieger. I think I flipped those around, but either way, they both are the glue that keeps this train rolling and on track. So thank you to them for being here. We wanted to make sure to include our contact information for each of us on there so that if you have questions about really anything related to Project Success, please feel free to reach out to us. Any of us would be more than happy to help you out with any questions that you might have. Real quickly, for those of you who either aren't familiar with us or maybe it's been a while since you've joined us, we just wanted to remind you who we are. Project Success is a resource center that is funded through the Indiana Department of Education, and our sort of main focus is to provide professional development to teachers and administrators of students with more significant needs. There's just a little bit of information here on this slide about the number of ways we've been able to do that and the kinds of topics that we cover. But we just wanted to sort of remind you about that, and then also mention that we're just proud to be part of the Indiana Resource Network, which is a whole network of resource centers, either fully or partially funded by the Indiana Department of Education, each of us having sort of our own niche area. And a lot of these icons that you'll see here, we're great partners with in terms of reaching out and supporting students and teachers. And so if you are in Indiana, definitely recommend checking that out. You're able to go to the Indiana Department of Education's website. If you type in IRN for Indiana Resource Network in the search bar, it'll bring up a list of all these resource centers where you'll be able to see a description of each one so that you'll know if there's one that may be able to help you. And I definitely recommend checking that out. If there's any kind of issue that you're stuck on related to students with disabilities, more than likely Indiana's got somebody out there who can help you. So definitely check out the Indiana Resource Network. Last little bit of housekeeping is just to key you in here on our website. So it was updated over the summer. So if you haven't been with us recently, this may look a little different to you, but just so you know, the web address itself is the same, projectsuccessindiana.com. If you're Googling us, you do have to make sure to get that Indiana piece in there because there are some other Project Successes out there. Today, for today's purposes, if you go to the events tab at the top of the page, you'll come to this screen where if you choose the Summer Institute 2020 from the dropdown and then click go, that will bring you to a page that has all those resources I was mentioning earlier, the recordings from previous sessions, any kinds of templates, the PowerPoint presentations themselves. And then I've also collected them maybe here on this slide, has just a few of the key resources pulled together. Those are all hyperlinked there. So either way, you'll be able to get to a lot of those resources. If this is your first time, or maybe it's just been a while and you'd like to refresh yourself, you can start there with those links. So oh no, I knew I was going to do that. I clicked on a link. Here we go. All right, can y'all still see my PowerPoint? Yes, okay, good.
Yes. Mhm.
You never know. It's always a wild ride here. Um, okay, so our agenda today is, I know we have a short time together, and so I want to pack in as much as possible. So we'll do just a super brief review of this inclusive framework that our whole series on building inclusive teams was built around, just to make sure, sort of level set and bring everybody back to the same page. And then we had a survey that we sent out to previous participants, kind of just getting some feedback from you all on what did you want to hear more about or learn more about. So we'll touch on just a couple of those requested topics that came through in that survey. And then I really hope to get through that fairly quickly. It's good information, but I think what's going to be most informative for you today and most enjoyable is to hear from this panel. So I'm going to try not to talk too much and really save a good chunk of time to get to that panel discussion. And then at the end, we hope to have some time for questions from you that we can hopefully answer. So let's look at this framework. Briefly, these are the steps of the framework that was created by the Project Success team this summer in hopes that it will help you walk through the whole process from beginning to end. If you're thinking about implementing inclusive practices in your school or in your district, or if you've already been implementing them, but you want to do it in a more strategic way, or you really want to enhance what's going on, you can start here from the beginning and kind of go step by step in a really intentional way. So that first step is establishing the need for change. It's a critical first step because if there isn't a belief that something needs to change in terms of increasing inclusion in your districts, it's going to be really hard to get that off the ground. So that's where we're starting. And then, of course, you'll gather a guiding team around you, some folks who will be able to support you in really getting this off the ground. Working together, you'll create a vision for where do you want to see this going? What do you want your inclusive practices to look like? And once you create that vision and really give yourself a target to work toward, you'll share the vision so that the people around you can help support that and find where they fit in within that vision of implementing or increasing inclusive practices. And then we get to that take action step, which is really a big part of the framework overall. It's where you're going to actually be implementing these inclusive strategies and practices. And there are some that will work well, and there are some that may not work so well. But that's where you start trying things, right? And just actually acting on these things in the vision that you created previously. Securing small wins is a really important step in here, which is as you're implementing these strategies, you want to be sure that you pay close attention to the things that are working, no matter how small they might be, because those are the things that you can build on to further increase your success the farther you go. So securing small wins and celebrating those small wins is a really important piece of this process. And then you get to reflecting and analyzing and adjusting. So as you're taking these actions and you are celebrating these small wins, you're going to take some time to reflect and really think about what's working, what's not. That's that analyzing piece. What is it that we've been doing that's working really well? What are some things we thought would work well, but honestly, something happened and it's not working as well as we thought it would be. Just really digging into that and then adjusting, making some adjustments to your plan and those strategies that you're implementing. And then it kind of cycles back around, right? You'll take some more actions, you'll secure some more small wins, keep reflecting, keep adjusting, and kind of cycle through there. And then lastly, most importantly, is that final sort of target of setting the norm. And that's going to be kind of a process, as you go as well. But setting the norm really means rather than this whole process feeling like some strange outside extra effort thing that you're doing, that inclusive practices, inclusive strategies, it just becomes part of the norm, truly, where you look around and you see some more inclusion happening, and it's just, yeah, that's just the way we do things, is having this increased inclusion. So that, in the very briefest of nutshells, is the inclusive framework, which is really the basis for everything that we've been talking about in this series and everything that we'll continue talking about here. Just wanted to share that with everyone so you know where we're coming from. So let's get into these requested topics. The first one There were a couple that showed up a few times, and so those are the two that I chose to really hone in on here today. The first one is about buy-in, about increasing buy-in to this whole process. Probably if you're on this call, you already have a pretty strong sense of buy-in, right? You believe in this and you want it to happen, but there are going to be people around you who are maybe struggling with that idea a little bit, or maybe need some additional information to kind of get more on board. So increasing buy-in is one thing that we'll talk about here, just again, super briefly, just to try to give you some ideas to think about. And then the other topic that was brought up a few times was co-teaching. And how does co-teaching fit into this idea of implementing inclusive practices and things like that? So those are the two that we'll touch on. But first, buy-in. So this quote is actually from a Harvard Business School professor, but I found it to be actually really telling about buy-in and the way we think about buy-in even in education. So when you're thinking about buy-in, it's critical when you're thinking about making any kind of large organizational change, which oftentimes implementing inclusive practices can be a pretty big organizational change in the school if it's not the way you had been used to doing things. And unless you win support for your ideas from people at all levels of the organization, those big ideas never seem to take hold or have the impact you want. I'm sure most of us has been in that situation before, either in education or not, where you have these great ideas and you're trying to get them rolling and something is holding it back. It's just not working the way you want. And it could be that it's the buy-in or lack of buy-in from some of the people around you. So having established sort of that importance of buy-in, I want to start by um, reviewing real quickly sort of where we usually start from, which is maybe where we shouldn't start from when we're thinking about, okay, this is how I'm going to get everybody on board. And the way that this is phrased in this article here, it's a Forbes article, is the describe and defend strategy. So typically what we end up doing when we know we want to get buy-in and we know it isn't easy to begin with, we think, okay, I've got my idea, it's developed out, and now I'm going to consider every objection. Who's going to say, nah, that's not going to work because, think about all those objections and then create airtight defenses for them. Well, this is how I'm going to address that. I'm going to tell them X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3. And this other person's objection, I'm going to make sure I tell them and point out this thing, 1, 2, 3, pop, pop, pop. Here's the research, here's the this, here's the that, right? I'm one of those people. I think that if I have enough information, I'll be able to convince you of, whatever it is. And then you get to the idea to the point where you're going to now sell the idea to others. Okay, I've done all my prep work. I've got the idea. I've thought about all the objections, got my defenses, and now I'm going to bring it to everybody. That can work sometimes, but oftentimes what it ends up doing is truly people feel like they are being sold to. Like, here's the thing that I'm going to convince you is what we're going to do. And that leaves that person sort of completely out of the process. Like, where do I fit in? Where does my opinion matter in this? So rather than um, going off of that sort of describe and defend strategy, what we want to switch to, what we want to pivot to is something that is more along the lines of co-creation. So when we're thinking about true buy-in, we want to have at least some creation of that idea or the development of that process from more than just sort of that leader. That's going to bring in the ability to discuss these ideas, debate the ideas. Everyone's going to feel a little more vested in the outcome because they play a role in sharing their opinions and their thoughts on the matter. So this list here, this bulleted list is sort of almost like a checklist of like, here are the things you're going to do if you're implementing or if you're trying to pursue this co-creation strategy instead. You're going to want to tell it like it is. You don't want to try to sugarcoat anything. Whatever it is, you're going to be honest from the beginning about, here's where we're coming from, here's why we want to do this, and here's the part or the role that we need you to play or that we'd like you to play. And that rolls right into that laying out the vision as well, being really clear about where you see this going, what's changing in your school, in your district, and why. So for this process, when we're thinking about implementing more inclusive practices, you're going to be really clear about, listen, students with disabilities have the right to be included. That's just how it is. There's law and there's research and there's best practice and all the things. But here's what we're changing. We're going to be increasing that inclusion. And here's why we're doing it, because students' outcomes are improved when we do that. You're going to talk about, here's where we're at today. Here's where we'd like to be in terms of inclusion, and make sure that you're really showing your co-teachers and your colleagues why this matters and the benefits that will come from it. So then the sort of second little section in thinking about this is to break that change into manageable chunks. Anything that is a big change that is going to take a lot of time, multiple years even, it's going to seem overwhelming to any one person or group. People will think, this is just impossible. I don't know how we're going to do all of this, right? So if you can be intentional about breaking it down into specific steps or phases and have sort of some in between goals that you want to strive for in between, that's going to make it seem more manageable, because and that goes back to that celebrating small wins as well. If you can get small bits of progress under your belt, bit by bit, then you work up to the full goal. Another element to consider here is personalizing the tasks that go within that, those chunks that you're breaking down. So making sure that the people you have on board for this really play to their strengths, and make sure that the tasks that you are going to have them do, that sort of aligns with people and their strengths. When those individuals are feeling like they're more set up to achieve success, they're going to have more buy-in, rather than if you try to get so and so to do a thing that it just really they're not good at, or they don't feel comfortable with it or whatever. It's going to be really hard for them to feel buy-in, and it's going to feel hard for them to be motivated by that, because they're going to feel uncomfortable with it, or like, I'm worried I'm not going to do it right or whatever. So making sure that you, as much as possible, align strengths with these tasks and these sort of goals, these interim goals, is one way, again, to help increase that buy-in. Then this last sort of chunk of ideas here, in terms of getting this co-creation strategy going rather than describing and defending, you're going to want to hear them out, the people who are along this journey with you, whether they are people who are already on board with you, or maybe they're the resistors, um, because everyone has something to say that is worth considering, right? They might be right, they might be wrong, but if there's someone who is playing a role in this process, you're going to need to know where they're coming from in order to help them move on to the next sort of stage. And the way they frame this a little bit is thinking about, especially regarding the resistors, that there's sort of three categories of resisting. I don't get it, I don't like it, and I don't like you. And you're going to approach those differently, right? So if someone just doesn't get it, this why are we increasing inclusion, that's something that we can address, right? We can find the research or the additional information and sort of explain in additional detail, here's why we're doing this, or here's what we're thinking about how we're going to approach it. We can do that. If the resistors are either I don't like it or I don't like you, that's different. um, for I don't like it, it's one of those things where, at some point it might be like, sorry, if that is what we're doing, I'm sorry you don't like it, but this is still what we're doing. But also you want to make sure that you can lean into any positive relationships that you have, so that you can sort of work yourself out of that I don't like it situation. And then the I don't like you, that's like a fully personal relationship thing, where um, it isn't about, that we can explain our way out of not understanding what the process is. If it's that they don't like you, okay, maybe they need to hear it from someone else, um, or whatever. But the point is, it's important to think about those resistors, think about where their resistance is coming from, because you'll be more effective in being able to address the resistance if you are considering where it's coming from. Um, I think that's enough about that. And then just these last 2 points, make sure you follow up, stay connected to this. Don't just sort of announce this huge change. Hey, everybody, here's what I need you to do. And then, cross your fingers and hope it all goes well. It's really important to stay connected with everyone, so everyone stays on track with, okay, this is my part of it. I understand what I'm doing. um, Here's a challenge I ran into. I want to make sure you know about that, all of that kind of a thing. And then lastly, I thought this was so interesting. Be prepared to change the change. So if you think about this whole process of implementing inclusive practices as a change, as you implement it and as you're bringing people on board and as you're addressing the resistors, be prepared, either you as the leader, or as a member of that team, that change might have to change. It might not look the same as you initially envisioned it. You may need to sort of mid-course make some corrections or adjust your plans. You may have to scrap the plan and start over. It just depends on what's going on. But that doesn't mean that you've been um, defeated in any way. It doesn't mean that it has failed. It just means that you're valuing the input that's coming in from people. And if you need to change the change and start over, or go back midstream and make some changes, that you value that input, and you're going to do it because you want to make sure everyone's on board as much as possible to sort of carry this change forward. I talked about that a lot more than I meant to, but it is a really important thing, I think. And I know that increasing buy-in was important to you all. So I wanted to make sure I explained myself as well as I could. I'm going to go right on to co-teaching, but I will make time for questions if anyone had questions about the buy-in here in just a minute, because I don't want to cut anyone off either. Co-teaching. So there's this big idea of co-teaching, and how is this going to fit into implementing inclusive practices? I thought this quote was kind of telling, just as far as acknowledging or admitting, I guess, that co-teaching, it's not a panacea, right? It doesn't mean that, wow, we're not sure how to implement inclusive practices. I know we'll do co-teaching and there, we put the Band-Aid on or whatever, and we fixed it. Like now this is an effective education for students with disabilities. It's not, right? It in itself is a really complicated thing and has several, wheels turning at once, but it holds great promise because it's showing that when these professionals are collaborating together, you can create some innovative options within however education is already established, however your school already operates, or however your district already operates. And in that way, you're being more responsive to the diversity of today's learners. So it's not just that we say we're going to co-teach and everything's solved, but it is definitely an avenue worth pursuing in order to be more responsive to our learners, and specifically our learners with more significant needs that we're talking about. So in general, co-teaching is and co-teaching isn't. Um, eh, Co-teaching is, of course, it's two or more teachers working together to provide instruction by, and then these are some things that go into it. You got to plan together, you got to instruct together, and you got to collaborate on more things besides grading, but grading is a big piece, right? The key word is together, and the key to that also is all of those things should be happening as a team. It's both of you. It's not one of you plans and one of you instructs. That is a model of teaching, but that's not true co-teaching, right? So if you're really invested in truly co-teaching, both of you are going to be involved in every step along the way. So co-teaching is not tag teaming, which is essentially what I just said, that one of you teaches while the other one plans the lesson, or one of you, teaches while the other one is grading papers or something like that. Again, that's a way to divide work, but it's not true co-teaching. It's not that one person's teaching while the other one sort of waits to be told what to do by the teacher, right? I was in that kind of co-teaching situation a lot, where we called it co-teaching, but it was really just me waiting for the gen ed teacher, me as a special ed teacher, waiting for the gen ed teacher to tell me what to do. That's not true co-teaching. It's not synonymous with inclusion. So we can't just say because we're doing co-teaching that we are doing inclusion. It's really more of just a strategy or a way of trying to increase inclusion, but it's not the same thing. Co-teaching isn't gen ed teachers working with special ed teachers inconsistently. That would be more of like a consultation, where if you're consulting with a special ed teacher and bringing in their knowledge and expertise. But if it's not consistent, it's really more of a consultative relationship and not that collaborative, you're partnered together kind of relationship. And then lastly, if we're really staying true to that idea of co-teaching, paraprofessionals are not co-teachers. They are certainly critical support people in this process. But if they're developing the lesson plans and if they're providing that direct instruction on their own, that's not co-teaching. Certainly paraprofessionals can provide instruction, but it's under the guidance of, that certified teacher. Um, and if it's a co-teaching relationship, it needs to be those certified teachers working together. So paraprofessionals are critical, but we don't want to consider them to be co-teachers if we're really staying true to this idea of co-teaching. So that is just a quick sort of what is co-teaching, what is not co-teaching. This next slide here, I'm not going to go over. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it already. It's there for you more as a resource for you to look back at. But it shows you these different models of co-teaching, what's considered to be different models of co-teaching that you can try. And usually co-teachers end up using several models at different times, right? It doesn't have to be you just choose one model and use that forever. But what I like about this table too is that it considers both sort of that traditional way of doing things, and then a lot of us are in a virtual world these days. So what might co-teaching look like in a virtual world? It's got a column there to think about those models in that way. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe we'll freeze. Well, in a minute here, we're going to be moving on to a few different categories of things to consider about co-teaching and really how you're going to make it work.
Actually,
As
try
soon,
the top left-hand button above your mouse pad. There you
oh,
go.
ta-da,
There you
thank
go.
you.
Uh-huh.
Um, all right, so this is another way of thinking through this whole co-teaching business. There are three sort of buckets that we're going to think about, and I'll try to touch on each of them briefly. One is making sure you understand the people involved. Two, being familiar with the methods and the strategies that you'll be using. And three, making time and space for co-planning. We'll talk about each of those in just a little bit more detail. I included this graphic just because I thought it was a really good summary of how to make the most of a co-teaching partnership. Just some quick recommendations that you can kind of refer back to and keep you on a good track as a co-teacher. But first, so this first element is to understand the people involved. So that means knowing yourself, means knowing your co-teaching partner, and it means knowing your students. There are some resources off to the left that can help you do that. So the color personality test to really, give you some inside scoop onto how you work and who you are as a person. And then the co-teaching staff strengths and responsibilities template is good because it helps you think through your own strengths, your co-teaching partner's strengths, and then how you can align responsibilities accordingly. That's the one that there's a screenshot there on the slide. And then that bottom one is co-teaching topics for discussion and consensus. Again, just some guiding questions, things to think through as a co-teaching partnership that if you think through that and really intentionally answer those questions, you will know yourself better, you'll know your co-teaching partner better, and you'll really have a good setup sort of ready to go for co-teaching. So those resources are all linked there for you. And that's the whole first element is really understanding who's involved with co-teaching. So then next, is being familiar with the methods and strategies. That involves being familiar with the curriculum itself, but also being familiar with the strategies and the methods that you're going to use to sort of impart that curriculum to your students. So I kind of liked this graphic here, just thinking about how, the design of the curriculum, how you're going to assess, and then in the instruction piece, I liked calling out those different legs of the stool. But trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to call out about that specifically. So I will say for instructional strategies, it's going to involve a lot of decisions between the two of you, between co-teachers. It's not just one teacher kind of making all the decisions about the instruction and then the other one carries it out. And it's important for you to think through that ahead of time, what those strategies are, rather than just sort of going by this, flying by the seat of your pants to figure out what's going to work. So there are three things that a good co-teaching partnership will sort of exhibit as they're co-teaching. One would be that they're being conspicuous with their strategies. And what I mean by that is the teachers themselves are being good models for the strategies and for the content that they're instructing their students in. So if you're demonstrating what a good reader does, or you're trying to teach what a good reader does, you're going to demonstrate that yourself. Or the same thing for being a good writer, but that you're actually modeling and really being conspicuous about using those strategies yourself, being really clear about it. The second thing is good co-teachers will exhibit sort of this ability to be like a procedural facilitator, right? So whatever's going on, these procedures that are going on, whatever sorts of supports or scaffolds are going on, whether it be graphic organizers or different visual supports, all of those things you're going to be, as a co-teacher, you're going to be one of the facilitators of that. You're going to show students how to use it and how they can be, interacting it with it themselves. Um, and you're not necessarily going to do it for them. You're going to really be sort of demonstrating and working in that facilitative role. And then lastly, um, the way that it was phrased here is mediated scaffolding, but really what they mean is that gradual release of responsibility, right? You're going to start off by being very teacher directed and then gradually start to release responsibility into more student independence. That is something that takes place both in a co-teaching role, but in just any classroom, right? In any good, well-taught classroom, we're going to have lots of support in the beginning when students are more unsure about what's going on. And then as they start to become more sure, we sort of let go so that they can experience that independence. This slide has just a few additional sort of strategies and things to think through instructionally. Honestly, whether it's in a co-teaching classroom or not, these are great ways to think about, imparting instruction to your students. So I just wanted to leave that there kind of as a, oh yeah, that's good. Okay, yep, that's good. I got to think about that. And then this next slide is how to apply those same strategies that were on the slide we just looked at, but again, in that virtual space, knowing that we've got virtual learning going on in a lot of places. How can I use those really great evidence-based instructional strategies, but carry them over into this virtual learning space? So again, those are more just references for you. I don't want to drag them into any great detail, but definitely want to point out that they're there so that you can return to them. All right. Oh no, now I'm stuck again. There we go. The last the last element that we want to consider is making time and space for co-planning. So both that you have the time to do it, that you set aside a specific space to do it, whether it's a physical space or maybe you make it online and you use some kind of Google Drive or other shared documents to sort of asynchronously plan. Either way, you've got to sort of intentionally set that time and that space aside. And then I'll talk about progress monitoring here in just a second, but I want to point out the screenshot on this slide is of a document that gives you some good guiding questions for how to be intentional about your planning. And what I like about this template or this table is that it talks about both pre-planning individually and then the collaborative planning that takes place with co-teaching. So sometimes there are some good things for gen ed teachers to consider and kind of plan through, and then special ed teachers to consider and plan through before you ever come together to plan those lessons. If you can do a little bit of that thinking ahead of time and then come together, it kind of maximizes the time that you're able to spend together. So again, just pointing out another resource for you to go back and look at, but I do think it can really help co-teachers be intentional about using that planning time together. There's also an additional template then that you can actually plan out sort of um, you know, getting your inclusive vision statement up there for sure. If you've worked through that, so setting some long and short-term goals for yourself as a co-teaching partnership, and then how are you going to meet those goals? And that gets back to that progress monitoring piece. Of course, we always think about progress monitoring our students, but in this instance, we want to think about progress monitoring ourselves as co-teachers and thinking about those strategies that we've been implementing. Are they working? Are they not? How do we know they're working? How do we know they're not working? Are we meeting the goals that we set for ourselves? So this plan, this action plan template here helps you be intentional about structuring that, get it written down so it doesn't, float away on the wind, and then gives you something to refer back to measure your own progress with. So, in conclusion, about co-teaching. Um, these are a couple ways we'll know that if it'll work and if it won't work. So if we know that we have identified the roles and responsibilities clearly, we've defined them ahead of time, we're all on board with how that's going to work, that's a way to ensure that co-teaching will work. If the individual co-teachers are able to utilize their strengths, that's going to increase the likelihood that the co-teaching partnership will work. If that structure, that co-teaching structure is supported by administration, and the support that would mean both like, well, yeah, sure, go ahead and co-teach, right? The allowance of doing that, the permission to do that, but also is the administration supporting you with time to plan, or at least being creative, helping you think through finding that time to plan? Are they, helping you think through different ways of making the planning process and sort of the coming up with the strategies? Do you have what you need to implement those strategies that work well in the co-teaching partnership? All of that. When the administration's on board, in that way, co-teaching has a greater likelihood of working. And then lastly, of course, co-teachers need to be using evidence-based strategies and differentiated instruction. That's going to make sure that co-teaching is more likely to be successful. It's not as likely to work if one teacher is consistently being pulled for other responsibilities. That happens quite frequently, I would say, with our special ed friends, that teacher is pulled frequently for behavior, for other issues that need to happen. And so that goes back to that. Then the teacher is just being a consultant, right? It's more of a consultative process, and it's not really co-teaching anymore if one teacher is constantly being pulled away. It's not really going to work if there's not adequate training and support. We can't just say, go teach, go co-teach, go forth, have fun. There is some training involved that will really help make that likelihood, of greater success. So that needs to be happening. Co-teaching isn't going to work necessarily very well if it's just being used as a cost-cutting measure with no higher purpose identified. Sometimes we think about or we hear about, yeah, okay, we're going to co-teach because if we put two teachers in one room, then we can surely have a few more students in there, and then we won't have to have as many, teachers to do this and that. That's going about it all the wrong way, right? If there's some cost cutting involved, that might be a nice fringe benefit, but if that's the only reason why we're doing it, there's not going to be a lot of buy-in, and it's just really not going to be effective. And then lastly, if one or both teachers isn't committed to the process, I mean, good luck trying to make it work and trying to be effective, right? So there really has to be a commitment on the part of both teachers in order for co-teaching to be successful. That's all I'm going to say about that. I'm going to click over to this slide. These are just some additional resources I pulled together because I know that some of you were really interested in knowing more. I wanted to share as much as I could in a short period of time, but also share these additional resources with you. So everything's hyperlinked there that you can get back to. And now I will turn it over to Heidi. Heidi's going to facilitate our panel so that you can hear straight from teachers some of the experiences that they've had with inclusive practices.
All right. Thanks, Ashley. You're going to flip the slides there, I see. All right. Well, today for our panel discussion, we have two educators who have already gone through the beginning process and the process of inclusive practices and adding it to their school districts. And so we are going to ask some guided questions and hear from them. So I'd like to introduce, and I'm going to have them, I'll say their name and I'll let them tell you a little bit about themselves before we get started. So first I'd like to introduce Jenny Smithson, and she is from Muncie School Community Schools.
Hi there, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with Project Success today. They've been a huge part of my journey as an administrator. I was a director in Alexandria, Indiana for 11 years, and just last year I made the move to Muncie Community Schools, and they have been so supportive through all of this. So I'm really just excited to be here to help you all. So again, this is my 13th year as a director here in Indiana.
Great, thank you. And we also have Crystal Kramer here with us, and she is from Pike Township.
Hi, I am a K-5 self-contained educator. I've been a life skills teacher for 13 years with Pike Township. And so just through those 13 years, just really trying to grow and push these inclusive practices, and then going through the Summer Institute with a team from school was really eye-opening, and really together as a group we saw the need for a change in the mindset, and really striving to put these in practices, as challenging as it can be during these COVID times. So.
Okay, great. All right, well, we will just get started right away with some of the questions so they can just share with you how that process went for them. So we'll begin with, we're going to give them both a chance to share. How did your inclusive team get formed, and who did you include?
I can start. When I first came to Muncie, what I realized was, and like I said, I would say this to them, this is nothing that I keep as a secret. I really felt like they were in need of a lot of assistance in the area of inclusion. They still had mild disability separate classes here in our district, and I was kind of appalled by that, because I hadn't seen that before in the districts that I worked in, either as a teacher or as a director before. So I just kind of spent my first semester and a half or so here just going around to all the schools, listening and learning to teachers, and really hearing, why are we still doing this? Why is this set up here? And I got the feeling from everyone I talked to, well, this is just the way we've always done it. And there was never that. The mindset was so pre-year 2000 that I just was going, oh my gosh, we've got a lot of work to do here. So I started just trying to feel out who are the people who thought this was not a great idea. And I found that I actually had some life skills teachers, some resource teachers, both my assistant directors just had never been given the option to do it any other way different. And we just started having conversations, and we pulled together a team. And what I found was the most surprising to me was I wasn't even thinking about general education yet because I still had to change mindsets of special educators. Like it was not even a chance I was going to get to include any general educators in this process until I had buy-in from my special ed teachers. So, and I have 92 staff in this district that I was talking about. And I'm just like, okay, I went from a district where I was in charge of about 20 to 90 some. And I'm like, okay, how do I start to get this buy-in that we all want? So when COVID hit, I just started having open office hours every week with all 92 of my staff. I invited them to a Zoom every single week, and we just started having conversations. And from that, I picked some people that I felt just really wanted to move forward, how understand our federal indicators and how that affects us, and what the corrective action we have to do as a district because we're not meeting requirements. And I pulled those people together then in the summer to really work on this.
Great, thanks, Jenny. And you often mention just that sometimes we have to start from that bottom foundational piece, right? From just our immediate colleagues to think about the process. Crystal, where did you start and how did you decide who to include in your team?
So when Project Success first announced the Summer Institute, I signed up right away. And then as I thought about it, I thought, oh, this would be great for the therapists that I work with as we are, a team here. And then like, just personally, I just started like expanding that, like, well, yeah, the therapist, but then the other resource teachers in my building. And then I'm like, well, I have these general educators that I've worked closely with for years. Like, let me invite them. And then I know there are a couple others that have an interest or they have a dual licensure. Maybe they would be interested. And so I just sent out an email to those who I thought and invited them to kind of come along this journey with me. And I got a really good response. And so when it came time to do the Summer Institute, we were all on board. We had everything going. We had a separate Google chat that we were, sharing. We had a Google Drive where we were, collaborating on the documents. And it was just really great. And then part of our action plan then was then to include more teachers maybe who didn't have that opportunity before or weren't able to over the summer. And so we approached our building administration about having a school committee. And so we now have an inclusion committee and an equity committee together. And so as part of that, then we really were striving to get representation from every grade level. And some grade levels, we have more than one teacher. And then also, our special area teachers and trying to just build that buy-in with the school as a whole, and then be a model then for the rest of our district as we go forward.
That's awesome, Crystal. And I think one thing that you really talked about here was that you kind of started small, right? It was kind of you first, and then you kind of set the fire and got people involved, and then you just kind of keep at it. And we talked a lot about that this summer. When you're building your team, oftentimes it does start small, and then when you secure those small wins that Ashley talked about in our framework, then you start to build, and then you start to add your team. So thanks for sharing that. Both unique ways that you started your inclusive team, and those are great ways and great ideas for others to consider. Let's move on to our next question because I know we are short on time. So an hour goes so fast for us. So how did you share your inclusive vision statement that you guys came up with? And so what was the plan to share it? And then who did you share it with? And then once you did that, what was the response? And I know that we have a slide that Jenny's going to show you to kind of really give you a great visual how they did it in Muncie.
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Crystal, and then she can change the slide when, yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So after the summer and we had come up with our vision statement, then we created kind of a PowerPoint presentation to share with our building administration. We used some of the slides from the Summer Institute. We shared the video just about the evolution of inclusion to show like where and then really framed it out like this is where we really truly are. This is where we really need to be. How are we going to do that? And kind of laid it out for our administrators so that they would see what we needed. And then that same slideshow or PowerPoint I shared with the whole staff when we were opening the committee up to everyone, as sort of like, here's a way for you to find out, like, what does this even mean when we say we have this inclusion and equity committee, so that they could look through the slides. They could, we had everybody who had been part of the Summer Institute listed, so if they wanted to reach out to anyone with extra questions, that they were able to do that. And then when we had our first committee meeting, we went back through it and really looked at that vision statement and opened it up, like, is there anything that you feel should be changed? Is the wording, is it too wordy for everyone? Like, and you know, a lot of teachers were like, I need to really take some time to unpack this and think through it, and can we come back to it later and kind of go through it. And so we had really good discussion, and I think have a little one joining me here.
Little coworker.
Yeah. Part of that discussion, you know, happened in smaller groups. We had the whole committee meet, and then as people left, I kind of just stayed on to field more questions. And as people were more comfortable, then they were able to share a little bit more of what they were feeling. Again, just opened up like the frustrations of how things are going this year with COVID, and how our vision statement looks wonderful. And if that's really, you know, is that really where we're headed when it looks like we're taking 10 steps backward? So it was good.
Good. COVID certainly has thrown a wrench into many of our plans, right? I was having that discussion many times this week with a couple of people when we're talking about the inclusive practice. It has been definitely a detour of kind of the trajectory that we were going, has stopped the momentum, but we have to just kind of trudge forth. But thank you, Crystal, for sharing. Jenny, we will switch the slide so you can tell us a little bit about how you went about implementing your vision statement and really sharing it with everybody.
Yeah, so I'm a real visual learner, so this works for me. What I did was, and when I said I have 90 some staff, that staff includes not just teachers. It also includes my paraprofessionals, it includes my SLPs, it includes my occupational and physical therapists, and includes all the members of my social and emotional learning team, which consists of my behavior coaches. I actually employ a BCBA in my district for behaviors. And then I also have my counselors, my school counselors, and they're student assistance coordinators, but they have social work backgrounds. So all of those people together are under my umbrella. And so these people all needed to hear this, and we all need, and we figured, you know, in a school district, if we have this many people that understand our vision and our goal of what we want to do, that we can infiltrate. Is that a good word? Yeah. That we can infiltrate, and we can be, you know, we can come at it from all angles. And we all know, especially, and I'm going to tell you this, yes, COVID has been a pain for so many of us, but there are some silver linings. Oh yeah. That I'm going to tell you have really helped with this initiative. The first one that is, I got to talk to my therapists, both my SLPs and my occupational therapists, about how, you know, with all these cohorts, we can't mix them. So you're going to have to push in more than pull out. And oh my goodness, you know, I didn't have to create buy-in, because it was kind of like, this is our reopening plan, sorry. And it really made them have to sit and think, because there really was no choice about, you know, how we change what we do. My social and emotional learning team, they all have professional learning communities. So all 6 of these little circles have their own professional learning community that meets bi-weekly during the school year for 1 hour. And we make sure they have coverage and things like that for that. And we developed our vision statement as a smaller team in the summer, but then I pushed out a recording, like I just did a PowerPoint with my voiceover of just explaining what the team had done, all the things we've gone through. and then sharing that vision statement with them. And then also we created a wildly important goal that we call, that's what we call it, it's our wig, that we wanted to decrease the percentage of our students in that LRE code 52, which is separate class here in Indiana, from 14% down to 9%. And we were going to give ourselves 2 years to do it. And part of that was restructuring our classrooms. Instead of having mild disability self-contained classrooms, how can we restructure and use all that staff to push kids out into classrooms and support them in classrooms? We were able to reduce that from 5 classrooms down to 2, just for this fall. Through them, they all took it upon themselves. This is how we can do this. This is how we can rearrange everything. I have counselors and social workers and behavior coaches that are pushing into classrooms to support kids. So, I mean, it's just, it's pretty awesome. So that PLC framework has really helped us with the ongoing professional development to deliver that vision. And we say the vision at the beginning of every PLC.
Awesome.
So that is something that we keep it at the forefront. We look at that wildly important goal. And then every month the DOE sends me our new percentage and I send that out to them so we can check our progress.
That's awesome, Jenny. I do agree with you about the silver lining. I was talking to a couple districts this morning and they said the best thing about COVID has been that the teachers are so much more willing for students to participate in their Zoom classes because then, you know, there's somebody there to support them. And so they have increased their inclusive practice because they'll just hand out their Zoom link. And if it's somebody that, you know, that's typically in there maybe about 15, 20 minutes, sometimes they stay the whole hour and they're getting access to the curriculum more so than they ever would. So
yeah.
Ashley, I would suggest, since we're down to about 7 minutes, maybe you skip to the last slide about what advice would they like to give people about beginning this process? Because I think we've talked about some challenges and some small wins along the way, but maybe we should just think about that last one. So there might be some times for questions. So if you had like one or two pieces of advice that you could give to your colleagues here on the call or others about you know, beginning the process, where, you know, what is something that you would say to them?
I just think it's really important to look for the people who are just ready to jump in and really get their support. And then also you really have to have the support of your administration. Yeah. If you don't have the support of your administration for this, it's going to be really tough for you. You might be able to do small things in your building alone. But if you're really looking at more of a district-wide initiative, which is what I was trying to do, I had to have support from my superintendent for that. Like, she had to understand what I was doing, why I was doing it, and what all this meant. And it was an easy sell, luckily for me. And then she was able to let me talk to all the other directors to talk to them about what we're doing and why and how it fit into our whole district strategic plan. Yeah. So I think that piece was key because they all know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Aligning it to everything, the strategic plan, and getting and really communicating and having that communication plan out is definitely a key. It does help when you're thinking about the outcomes and what it's going to look like.
Yeah, they need to know what's in it for them too. Yeah, they really do. They need to know what's in it for them. I kept saying, you know how we have to push out all that professional development about 1% and all that will go away. Like, I keep telling them, you will have less things you are required to do for corrective action every single year. You know, they have to know what's in it for them too. So
yeah, great. Thank you. And Crystal, what would be your advice? Jenny was telling us really from an administrator role, but you as a teacher who really just took on that role as yourself as a teacher leader and really thinking about how to do it in your building, what would you tell us?
I think for me, one was finding those people who would come alongside me and take it on and really have that same mindset. But also just checking yourself. I think that self-reflection that we did at the beginning was really telling, because some of the things that I hadn't even considered, living in my own little bubble and world as a self-contained classroom, like as I started opening it up, I was like, well, I don't even know, do we do this as a school wide? Like, maybe I do it, or maybe I don't do it, but other people are. And I think really taking that time to reflect on your own practices and where you have your own personal hangups, and where also you are like really jumping out there and finding other people who are ready to jump with you.
What a great point, Crystal. I mean, really thinking about, we did start that process out, really kind of reflecting and assessing yourself and assessing your own practices. And it really starts within, right? To make sure that you really have the right mindset, and so that you can really help express that mindset and have others to jump on board. So what a great point. Thank you for making that point. I think that's just such a key component that we talked about this summer. Well, Ashley, we have about 3 minutes. And so I want to give some time for questions. I know you do too. So Jenny and Krista, we thank you so much for sharing what you've got kind of gone through your journey through this process. I know that journey is a long journey, and that you have you certainly have some miles to still go, but it sounds like you guys are headed in a great direction, and you are both finding those small wins, and especially in that silver lining that you've both have talked about. And so we thank you for sharing that so much.
And Jenny and Crystal are both agreeable to for anyone who has questions for them specifically, or any questions about the content we covered previously. So this really extensive question and answer period we have time for now. If you either want to share your question in the chat box or feel free to unmute yourself, just know that Jenny and Crystal are open for questions as well.
Melanie said in the chat box that she certainly agrees with us about administration needing to be on board, but we also need that definitely the support from gen ed educators, and that certainly is true.
I'm curious to know how you have involved parents in this process. I'm a special ed coordinator in Keller, Texas, and I'm heading up our inclusion initiative. And we actually did an audit last year, and this year we just announced our rollout, and a part of that is a parent forum committee. And so I'm just wondering how you brought parents into this conversation.
Crystal, you can go ahead.
So one of the things that we talked about as a committee, because we really did want to involve parents, is as we reflected, especially as like a resource team and a special ed team, that parents don't always, when we come into the case conference, we kind of come in with a plan, and then we talk through it and we adjust it as we talk with the parents. But we really needed to maybe bridge that gap before the conference and say like, okay, we're going to be talking about the IEP. I want you to think about ahead of time, what are your child's strengths? What areas are you already concerned about, so that we're not hitting them head on in the middle of the conference with those. And then also, coming back then later after the conference, I know Indiana has its own, as a state, asks parents to fill out a questionnaire about how they feel the case conference went and if their voice was heard. But we wanted to individually say, like, how did you feel the conference went? Was there anything that we could have done differently, anything that you're concerned about now moving forward, and having those conversations with our parents. And then also sharing those options as we're starting to move students from an LRE of 52 to maybe a 51, like really giving them that time, having that time to explain what that is. And I think a lot of parents didn't know that that could really be done before. And now we're like opening those doors and saying, yeah, we can make that happen. We should be making that happen. And we want to be your partner in making that happen.
Yeah, I think that one of the big things I did was I told teachers, I said, you need to look at your data. I want you to pull your data up, and I want you to tell me where is this child, where could we approach the parent about where this would work for them, and how can we present that in a way that they're going to be excited about it. And then we would do a heads up before the conference because I didn't want to blindside any parent in a conference. I mean, if their kid has been in a self-contained room for 4 years, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh, by the way, he's in gen ed next year. Like, wow! They kind of freak out. So I wanted to call and just give them a heads up and say, hey, we're seeing this data and this is what we're seeing. And we want you to think about this because we're going to talk about it at the meeting. And we found we really only had about 2 parents that gave us a ton of pushback. Most of them were excited that they would get to be with peers.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. What a great point too, Jenny, that you really brought it back to data too, so that you can show them the facts about, you know, what their student should be having access to the curriculum, as well as where you guys believe as educators where they can most benefit.
Well, and I found we had one student in a self-contained mild disabilities room who was the second highest math score in his entire grade level, but he had been shoved in there because of behavior. Mm-hmm. And so just saying we can provide these supports in a regular classroom, we can do this. Yeah. And assuring them that we could was helpful.
Great.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any other questions?
If you do have questions and either you don't feel comfortable asking them now or it just pops up later in your mind, please, again, feel free to reach out to us. If you do have questions for Crystal or Jenny, I'd be happy to pass them along. Or you're more than welcome to email me or Heidi or any of the Project Success team members. We'd be happy to continue this conversation afterward too. So don't feel like you have to get your question in last minute here. Jenny shared her email address in the chat box. So if you want to reach out directly to her, thank you, Jenny. That's great.
And also, Mary has put in the chat box that just so you know, if you've registered for today, the presentation from today and all the resources will be emailed to your address that you registered for.
All right. I think we'll go ahead and shut it down for today. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Really, that hour flies by, but I'm so glad to have that time with everybody. Jenny, Crystal, thank you so much. I think that was just the highlight of this whole afternoon, was to hear in real life, you know, how this is actually going down. So thank you for sharing. Thanks everyone for joining. If you have questions, email us. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks.